Hi, welcome to this demonstration of deploying a FortiGate cloud native firewall in Azure and logging to a storage blob account. The scenario covered is displayed in this diagram where CNF is interacting with the load balancer. The area in the gray represents the customer's environment with compute resources gated by a load balancer. The part highlighted in red is maintained by Fortinet. CNF as a service alleviates customers from managing the underlying network firewall infrastructure. Once CNF is deployed, all traffic trying to access the compute resources will be routed to the CNF for inspection and allowed if meeting all the policy criteria. The documentation link is provided below if you want more information. Find the FortiGate CNF tile in Marketplace and subscribe. Once the CNF is deployed, the firewall must be registered and your cloud account onboarded in the CNF portal. The Getting Started portion of the admin guide provides detailed steps to subscribe to FortiGate CNF and for onboarding your cloud account. Before showing you the CNF deployment, here's my setup in Azure, which matches the diagram shown earlier. So I have this Ubuntu VM running Apache and Nginx web services, and those are accessed through the standard load balancer that's deployed. So let's look at the load balancer. The load balancer is configured with the front end public IP address, which is accessible from the public to get to the compute resources. And the back end is configured pointing to my Ubuntu server hosting the Apache service and Nginx service. I only have one VM in here right now, but you can add more as you add resources to your environment. Make sure that you follow the Microsoft documentation on setting up health probes and also load balancing rules. Let's log into the portal. My portal is already onboarded with my cloud accounts, so let's log in and deploy a CNF. Here you can see my AWS and Azure accounts already registered. So CNF can be deployed from here. Earlier, I showed you subscribing to CNF via the marketplace, which is the process if you don't have a CNF portal access. Now let's deploy a CNF with logging to Azure Blob enabled. So go to New Azure, click on that, and provide a name. So we're just going to do CNF-Azure-Blob and select the region. We're going to stay in the US West and then enable the storage logging for Blob. And here you'll see a drop down for your storage account that was created once you onboarded your Azure cloud instance into CNF. So we'll select that and then leave the rest default and then link to an existing load balancer that's been created earlier. Here, we're just going to select the load balancer and go through all that. So you select the account, the resource group, the load balancer name, and then the front end IP. Finish with that, you click OK, and then you go back to the main deployment screen and click OK. And once that's done, it starts being deployed, and it'll take a while. So we'll come back once the deployment is complete. Now that CNF is deployed, you can see here it is active. Let's now dive into the configuration. As you can see here, its provision is active. It has a source IP, and then storage blob logging is enabled. You can see that. And then in the endpoint configuration, it's pointing to the existing load balancer that's configured in Azure. And there's a public IP address that we'll use for testing, accessing the servers behind the firewall. Now let's look at the policy set. Right now the default is allow all, and we'll change that to block port 80 in our test to show you how this policies will work. Now let's take a look at the details of this block port 80 policy. So let's go to edit, and in here is the block port 80. If we double click on it, these are all the parameters that can be configured Right now is just a basic policy to block port 80. So we're saying any source, right, any destination, but the service is HTTP. You can you can add other services if you want, match what your environment is and what the applications you want to block or allowed, and logging the violations, and then the policies enabled. And then there's also options for addresses and services that are there that you can custom applications that you wanted to allow and so forth. Now let's do a quick demo. Here's the CNF instance, right, which is allowing all, and we're accessing the IP address of the load balancer that's fronting the VM that's running the Nginx and Apache. As you can see here, the pages are loading for port 80 and port 8080 for the test HTML for the Nginx page. Now let's load the Apache page as well. So we'll delete the test HTML, and you can see that port 80 is still loading, and same thing for port 8080. Let's change the policy now. Go to the CNF page to configure policy set. Use the drop down to block port 80 and save. And once it's saved, we'll go back to the URL pages. And as you can see, if we click reload, the port 80 for Apache page continues to spin, as you can see in the tab. And same thing for the test page, we reload it, right? So that's spinning. We'll go to port 8080, and that is just loading just fine. And same for the Nginx test page. Now let's take a look at the storage in Azure. So here's my blob storage container for CNF logs, and I'm just going to download one of these logs from Azure, but I'm going to use Azure Explorer to download. So please find the documentation to set that up so you can download the Azure Storage Explorer and download the file from here. And this is the file I'm going to download. And here's the file in an expanded view. We're searching for denied, and this is the entry here, right? You can see the dev name, FortiGate CNF Azure Blob entry, and you can see that the destination port is 80, and the action is denied. Policy name is block port 80, and then the destination IP is right there, .29. Here are the resources that were utilized building this demo and the environment. The FortiGate CNF administration guide, the CNF in Azure Marketplace, and Azure load balancing documentation. Thank you for watching.